Hello, my name is Alex, and welcome to Eclectic Eccentrics, a series in which we will be looking at some marvellous and some not so marvellous individuals who have been described as eccentric somewhere along the way. Their stories might delight, terrify, or intrigue you, but they will always entertain. Hello listener, it is your host, Alex, post-recording, but pre listening to said recording if that makes sense. I just wanted to preface this episode with the fact that I have ummed and erred about whether I should really include this episode in Eclectic Eccentrics, and whether it is worthy of joining our hallowed ranks of other eccentrics. You see, when I am researching these episodes, even where an individual's behaviour has been a bit dubious, I can usually satisfy myself that there is at least some level of eccentricity involved. In this case, however, I am not too sure that there is. In fact, if I had to be honest, I think the chap you're going to be hearing about today was just a bit of a scallywag. After some consideration, however, I have decided to leave this episode in, as there is reference to some interesting history, and it does examine, as I touched on in the episode, how the aristocracy and higher classes have used eccentricity to excuse their otherwise poor behaviour. Anyway, enough nattering on. Let's get on with it. Henry Beresford, 3rd Marquis of Waterford, Lord Henry Beresford, Earl of Tyrone, the Mad Marquis. Henry was certainly a man with an array of monikers. He was also a man who, had he lacked his titles, may not have been fondly remembered as an eccentric. Unlike many eccentrics, whose actions tend to be fairly innocent, though we have managed to dig up a few so-called eccentrics where this is certainly not the case, granted, a lot of Henry's behaviour throughout the early stages of his life was at the expense of others around him. As you will hear, it is questionable, I believe, whether his actions were born of some level of eccentricity, or whether he was just a downright menace to society. I do wonder, in this case, are we just seeing the term eccentricity being used as a label reserved only for the wealthy in order for them to excuse what was ultimately poor behaviour? Well, let's have a look, and you can tell me what you think at the end. Henry Beresford was born on the 26th of April 1811, and he succeeded the title Marquess in 1826 following the death of his father. Sadly, both of Henry's parents and his older brother died before he was 17. We are again perhaps seeing a childhood trauma, which maybe gave rise to his later poor and odd behaviour. Of course, it is always hard to tell and one can never be sure, but it is certainly something we've seen in others throughout the Eclectic Eccentric series. You are perhaps familiar with the saying, "paint the town red." This is a phrase which is synonymous with old Henry, as it is claimed by some that the phrase originated from an incident that Henry himself was involved in on the 6th of April 1837. It is a dubious claim, however, as laid out quite plainly by Drew from Macclesfield in a Guardian newspaper article which says, "It is not from the Marquis of Waterford and Melton Mowbray. The phrase was never used to describe the Mad Marquis until 50 years after his death, of which the term painting the town red had been used numerous times elsewhere. It's just something the Melton Mowbray Tourist Board like to push on unsuspecting idiots." So God forbid you ever believe something a tourism board tells you, especially if you happen to find yourself in Melton Mowbray. I am still going to regale you with the tale, but just take it with a pinch of salt. Otherwise Drew from Macclesfield might come after you. So, on the 6th of April, 1837, following a day of heavy drinking at Croxton Races, Henry was a big fan of his horses. Henry, along with a number of his fox-hunting friends, a terrible pursuit in the name of so-called sport, may I add, ended up in the town of Melton Mowbray, famous of course for its pork pies and cheese. Upon arrival, they were asked for payment by the toll-keeper, as these were the days when you had to be let into such towns via a gate. Instead of just doing the decent thing and paying the man, Henry and his fellow rogues decided to go on a bit of a rampage by all accounts. Spying a number of ladders, paint pots and brushes nearby, there were ongoing repairs in the area, Henry and co attacked the toll-keeper and a constable who tried to intervene, by seizing them both and painting them in red paint. The group then boarded up the front door of the toll house, which they also painted red, before proceeding into the town, carrying the stolen equipment with them, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake, which included painting any door they encountered red, pulling on door knockers. It is in fact reported that following Henry's death, thousands of door knockers were found at his property, knocking over flower pots. The group even pulled down the sign of a local pub and threw it into the canal. They painted another pub sign in red paint. They vandalised a bank and a post office, tried to tip a caravan in which someone was sleeping inside, assaulted and painted several police constables, and when one of the group, a chap called Edward Reynard, was eventually detained by the police, the group went to the prison where Edward was being held, a place called Bridewell Prison, and they broke him out by breaking several locks. This was after threatening to murder the constables and demanding the key. Naturally, as you can imagine, and quite rightly, the locals were not impressed with the group's behaviour. After he had finally sobered up, Henry paid for all the damage that the vandalistic group had caused, as he often did in such circumstances. This did not, however, prevent the group from ending up in court. After being found not guilty of riot, but guilty of common assault, each of the louts was fined £100, which is about £15,000 to £16,000 in today's money. This destructive behaviour was not a one-off, however. It is reported that Henry once offered £10,000, over £1 million in today's money, to the Greenwich Rail Company on the proviso they staged a train crash that he could watch. Henry appears to have thought that this would have been funny. Fortunately, the train company refused. Henry was also known on occasion to charge through the local town on horseback, causing considerable alarm to others. This ended up with him back in court, where he asked for his horse to be cross-examined. The case was ultimately dismissed, so God knows what the horse said. Another amusement he took part in included purchasing a large quantity of alcohol and offering it, for free, to the public, just to see what would happen. Oddly, a riot ensued, and Henry had to be taken away for his own safety. He seems to have revelled in mayhem. Many of you are perhaps aware of the urban legend Spring-Heeled Jack. First seen in 1837, Spring-Heeled Jack was a devil-like phantom who haunted and terrified members of the public all over the United Kingdom. Described as having a frightful appearance, including claws and eyes that resembled fireballs with the ability to breathe coloured flames, Spring-Heeled Jack was reportedly involved in several incidences up until around the 1870s. The nature of these incidences were varied, some more violent than others. In one case, for example, the phantom was alleged to have attacked a woman, clawing at her clothing with metallic-like claws before the assailant fled. In another case, two sisters walking down an alleyway were met by a cloaked figure who blew a quantity of blue flames into one of the sisters' face. It is questionable whether Spring-Heeled Jack did exist as described. However, Henry's name has been raised in conversations as potentially being the sinister phantom. His name was first put forward by a chap called E. Cobham Brewer, who highlighted that Henry amused to amuse himself by springing on travellers unawares, to frighten them, and from time to time others have followed his silly example. It was also noted that Henry enjoyed drunken brawling, brutal jokes, and, as you've heard, vandalism, not to mention his irregular behaviour and his contempt for women. Further, he is known to have been in the same area of London where the aforementioned incidences took place. As mentioned by E. Cobham Brewer, others liked to copy Henry's behaviour, so Spring-Heeled Jack could have been one of any number of copycats. We will never know. However, the behaviour of this phantom appears to be in line with Henry's modus operandi. As highlighted, Henry had some very odd behaviours. Whether they were what we could call eccentric behaviours is up for debate, however. As highlighted at the beginning of this episode, was the term eccentric just used by Henry's aristocratic pals to excuse his unacceptable and abusive behaviours? Henry's life has been summarised by the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. Now, the following does go over some of the things I've already told you, but I do think this extract is a worthwhile addition. Beresford, Henry de la Poer, 3rd Marquess of Waterford, reprobate and landowner, was born on the 26th of April 1811 at 5 Mansfield Street, Marylebone, Middlesex. His elder brother and both his parents died before he was 17, and the young Marquess, who was educated at Eton College, became notorious for his wildness. He returned to Eton in 1838 to steal the headmaster's whipping block, an exploit Waterford celebrated with an annual dinner. He matriculated at Christ Church, Oxford in 1829, but was invited to leave, and for the next decade he was to be found most frequently at the racetrack, on the hunting field, or in the police courts. His favoured companions were young sporting men, prize fighters, and prostitutes. Powerfully built, rich, and with an uncontrolled sense of humour, it amused him to challenge passer-bys to fight him, to break windows, to upset, literally, apple carts. He painted the Melton Mulberry toll bar red. He fought a duel. He painted the heels of a parson's horse with aniseed and hunted him with bloodhounds. When, as frequently occurred, his activities landed him in court, he laughed at, and paid, the derisory fines which were designed to control the excesses of the working class, not those of the apparently limitlessly wealthy aristocracy. Waterford's reputation as a rowdy and boisterous ruffian led to his name being associated with Spring Hill Jack, the unknown figure who terrorised women in London in 1838. This all said, however, later in life Henry married a lady called Louisa Stuart, and it appears that this calmed him down considerably. He is reported to have lived an exemplary life up until his death at the age of 47. He sadly died following a horse-riding accident in which he broke his neck. A sudden end, indeed. And there we have it, Henry de la Poer Beresford. An eccentric, or just a very naughty boy? I'll leave that up to you. And for now, I say, toodle pip.